Hi everyone, it's Dr. Michael and I'm here to talk to you about lesson planning today. We'll go over some of the critical components that may be a review for some and brand new for others. The first thing that we have on our lesson is of course the title. This person is teaching volleyball and the skill that they're focusing on is serving. Something that is important to remember is when you are teaching, you are not teaching an overall activity. So let's say we're using volleyball. You're not teaching every component of volleyball in one lesson. We break this down into different skills. So our skill today is serving. The grade level that I'm hovering over here is grades 5 to 6. So whatever we're teaching has to be developmentally appropriate for grades 5 and 6 or upper elementary. And our subject is, of course, physical education. The first thing that you will see in every lesson is what we call a central focus. So what is your primary focus? In this case, it is serving. When you look at the central focus of your lesson and think about what you are doing, I want you to think about the why. So the central focus is simply not volleyball or serving. Think about the why. Why do you need to know how to serve in the game of volleyball? So I will read aloud what this sample lesson has to say. The central focus of my learning segment is for students to be able to properly demonstrate the skills, the cues that are used in the game of volleyball. Students will also demonstrate their ability to work well with others, which if you coach or teach already, you know that this is critical to success. So here's where we get into the why. Why do we need to know how to serve? The purpose of the volleyball serve is to put the ball into play. Of course, you can't have a game or start a game if you don't know how to serve the correct way. It also distracts the opponent's offense. Serving is the only time, a player has complete control of the ball from initial contact to finish. The server's goal is to make a tactical serve to increase the chance for your defense to stop the opponent's offense. So right here, this person did an excellent job of talking about the why. We're learning about why serving is important on top of the skill itself. The next part of the lesson that you'll see as I scroll down are the content standards. This person has 6 in their lesson. It is completely okay to have, let's say, 2 or 3. You don't have to have 6. It probably just so happens that 6 standards fit appropriately into what this student was teaching. I've inserted a link here, and you are not required to do this, but for the sample, I thought it was a great idea to put the link to the course of study standards here. So this should open for you all here. What you see here is what we call the ALEX website. I will talk a bit more about this, as time goes on, but physical education is where this takes you directly. So as you can see here, you have physical education updated in 2019, view by grade or course. So of course, this is K, grade 1, 2, 3, and so on up to 8. Now, you will not need this in any class except maybe team sport in high school, but any standards beyond grade 8 are called your beginning kinesiology. So when you click on these, you will see that it takes you to physical education grade 9. Here you can see motor skills, lifetime activities, grades 9 through 12. So here's where you look for your grade level. We are actually going to back up a bit on this and pick, because our lesson is grade 5 or 6, let's pick grade 5. So course of study in physical education. Keep in mind, every skill will not be present in your lesson. So you may not have, let's scroll down, you might not have, of course, any kicking in volleyball. Okay, I saw kicking up here. That's not something that you are going to need in volleyball. So you might want to read over it, but if you're not using it, that's completely okay. Let's take a look here. You have your overall skill. So here it's hopping, galloping, jogging, running, or what we call locomotor skills, as some of you know, jogging, running, jumping, landing. So what you want to do is kind of keep scrolling down. You know what you want your students to learn. So think about this. Non-locomotor skills. So do they need any type of stability skill in volleyball? They may. This talks a bit about dance, but think about that as you move forward. Stretching, twisting, bending, that could be applicable. Underhand throw, you're probably not going to need that. Dribbling with control. Okay, volleying. Here we're getting a bit more into what we need. Volleying, overhand, and underhand. Volleying is present in more than just volleyball, so keep that in mind. But if this applies to the skill that you're teaching, it's probably a standard that you want to use. Okay. Striking with an implement, jumping rope, plenty of skills here. It doesn't have to do with just volleyball. Keep in mind, is spatial awareness important in volleyball? Of course it is. If you'd played before, you know that you have a specific space or position on the court that you occupy, and it's very important to be aware of what's going on around you. For example, if you played, something that's common to do is call out "got it" or "mine," because that tells the player coming for the ball not to come into your space. So spatial awareness is very important. I'm going to bump back into our lesson here. So you can see what this person does is they put AL-Alex PE 5.6, 5.9, 5.10. Okay, so I'm going to go back to our standards. Okay. So here's what this person did. So 5-2.1, sorry, this is why I have my glasses on. 5-2.1, so you put the number of the standard here, and then you copy and paste. This is one time I'll tell you it's okay to copy paste. You copy paste your standards in here. This will not be considered plagiarism because you are expected to take it directly from the ALEX website. So you might have to do a little bit of digging, a little bit of looking over, but there should be more than one standard at the appropriate grade level that applies to the skill that you are teaching. Awesome. So I hope we're all doing okay up to this point. The next thing I'd like to discuss, and something that's very important, and quite often students will need a little bit of extra help on this. And if you do, that's okay. This is the time to get that help writing the learning goals or learning objectives. In health and PE, we have 3 different types of objectives that we focus on. The most common one that you will think of is your psychomotor. That's your doing, your learning, your moving objective. The cognitive objective is, we call it the thinking domain. And the affective objective is focusing on things like sportsmanship, teamwork. I frequently refer to it as the feeling domain, things that you can't maybe record as easily as a skill. So are you cooperating with a partner? Are you working well with the team? Are you being positive and encouraging to your classmates? Okay, so you need to know your 3 domains of learning. That is the first thing. Once you know your 3 domains of learning, and I just told you your 3 domains of learning, it's that simple. But once you know what they are, you can then move on to being more specific. So a mistake that I see students make quite frequently is only talking about psychomotor objectives or those skill-based objectives. That's great. You can have more than one, but we also need to focus on cognitive and affective on top of that. So you have some different components to each objective, and this is universal for all. You need some criteria. So after the students have received the appropriate amount of instruction and practice. I really like this because it tells you that they're not expected to come into the lesson knowing this. After they've received the appropriate amount of instruction and practice, they will be able to demonstrate the proper techniques for serving in volleyball. Okay? If you're in a planning-based class only, and we will talk about this moving more forward, your upper level classes, we require you to assess. If you're in a planning class, if you're someone looking at this and going, I've never planned a lesson, I'm not going to immediately expect you to assess your students. So something that we frequently use is a rubric to assess in the psychomotor domain. So you need that criteria. If you have this objective, and it's very well written, but if all that you have is this, I'm going to go, how do you know that your students learn? What if they only did this one time out of 20 attempts? Do you think they learned based on your own experience and your own observation? Did your student learn? The answer is probably no. They need a little bit more practice. So in order for you to know that they've been successful, you need to set that criteria. So students should have scored 7 out of 9 possible points on the rubric for satisfactory performance. It does not have to be a rubric. It can be something like a visual observation. Were they able to appropriately serve the ball using all of the cues over the net? Let's say 8 out of 10 tries. That may be your criteria. This is open to discussion. It doesn't have to be a rubric, but I do need to know, how do you know? We call that measurable. You need to be able to measure that your students have learned, okay? The same thing applies to the cognitive domain. So this is your thinking domain. This might be something like, you may not have the highest skilled athlete, but they might be able to recite and know all of the cues for you, okay? So after the students have received the appropriate amount of instruction and practice, they'll be able to demonstrate their knowledge of key principles of terminology related to serving, okay? So the way that they do this in this person's lesson is they answer 3 out of 5 questions correctly on the handout quiz, okay? Again, some of you may not yet be required to create a handout or create a quiz, but just keep in mind you still need that criteria. It might be 3 out of 5 verbal cues. If you go around and talk to your students as they're practicing about the cues of serving, are they able to answer your questions correctly? Okay, again, we need that criteria present in there. That is most frequently what I take points off for students turning in a lesson in the learning goal section, is you need that criteria. That's frequently where students miss out on points. It's so important. I need to know that you know that they've learned. The same thing applies for affective. Now what this is again, it's most frequently in the form of a behavior check sheet or check yes or no on sportsmanship, something along those lines. So frequently what our students will do is create they call it a behavior check sheet or a behavior checklist after students have received the appropriate amount of instruction and practice. So you see a little trend here. They'll demonstrate positive, encouraging behavior toward their peers. They'll score a 7 out of 9 on a checklist based on their attitude. So again, this is individual to you and individual to what you're teaching. Frequently what students use is some type of checklist or check-off sheet or criteria that the students have participated effectively. They've cooperated with their classmates and so on. Each class will have an example of assessment tools in your lesson planning folder, so keep that in mind. I'm showing you the plan today, but you'll be able to access these assessment tools as well. So if you didn't take anything away from that, but one thing, please take away that I need criteria for your students. I need criteria to know that they were successful. All right, take a deep breath. We're almost through the tough parts at the beginning of the lesson. The next thing that students frequently leave out or mess up on, I've had students actually delete this out of the lesson. Don't do that. I will give you a 0. Just because it's not there doesn't mean I'm not going to grade it, okay? This is really important. Theoretical principles and research-based best practice. Frequently, what students will take a look at in PE, because it works so well, is Bandura's theory of modeling. What that says is that if I'm going to teach you something, if I model that skill for you, that helps you to learn, okay? I have no problem, as long as there's modeling happening in the lesson, with you using Bandura frequently. You don't have to pick a different theorist each time. However, I've had some students find some awesome theorists. A couple that I didn't even know about. And once I read a bit more into it, I was like, this applies, and it's absolutely fantastic. But we'll talk a little bit more about theorists in class as we move forward. But Bandura, his theory of modeling and imitation frequently works very well in physical education. And we're talking physical education here. If you're a health major, we'll have a whole separate video on health education. It's very similar, but there are some differences. But Bandura frequently works very well. The drills and instruction carried out in this lesson are appropriate for students because they demonstrate Bandura's theory of modeling and imitation. Bandura's social learning theory states that people learn from one another through observation, imitation, and modeling. So think about this. If you're someone like me, I can read a manual about, let's say, how to put a bicycle together, and there's probably not much of a chance I'm going to do very well. But if I have someone showing me how to use the tools and what goes where, I do a whole lot better. So think about that. It's not necessarily only unique to skills. It can be for anything. This part is super easy. Materials that you need. So this person needs a volleyball net, a full court or gym floor, youth volleyballs, and 4 beach balls. That's great. Any resources that you use can go here. Did you use your textbook? Did you find something awesome on PE Central? Um, did you get the idea from, say, somebody that you work with or somebody that you coach with? Just give them credit, that's all. Make sure that you have all of your resources listed here. Here's where there's really not a right or wrong. I don't mind if you talk to other PE teachers or if you use resources from a game that maybe you knew as a kid. If you find something like your textbook or PE Central, that's also great too. There's no right or wrong here. Okay, we're moving on to the language function. We're almost there. Frequently, you're going to be demonstrating, right? So here this person talked about demonstrating the proper techniques for serving in volleyball, okay? That will frequently be your main language function, is demonstrating. When we talk about language demands, think about those action verbs. So the teacher is explaining the instructional cues, okay? And here, I'll actually put those on a separate line for you. Our instructional cues, you'll frequently hear myself, Dr. Davis, or Mr. Heatherly talk about, what are your cues for this lesson? Cues are a nice way to help students remember the proper steps to complete the skill. So in this instance, it's ready position, hold the ball, step and swing, contact and aim. The key is making these easy for students to remember, especially those younger students. I always tell this story too. When I was in college, we had to take aquatics. We actually had to get in the pool and swim. And the person who taught us the elementary backstroke, which is a different version of the regular backstroke, used the cues chicken, airplane, soldier based on the way that your arms were positioned. And this is 20 years later, I still remember that. So cues are a nice way to help someone remember how to do the skill. So you will have to have cues when you're teaching. We expect you to relay those cues onto your students. We expect your students to be able to say and do those cues as well. You'll hear me say it, you'll hear Dr. Davis say it, and you'll hear Mr. Heatherly say it. It's very important that the students can say and do the cues, okay? So, very important, which is why I put them on a separate line and bolded them for you. Back to those action verbs. So describe, identify, evaluate themselves as well as peers, assess. So these are not set in stone. You don't have to use these action verbs. If you're doing them, that's fantastic. If you have something else that you'd like to add, even better, okay? So think hard about those language demands and what you're going to be saying to your students or teaching them as you move through the lesson. All right, moving on to differentiation and plan support. So how are you going to differentiate? And I'd like you to get out of the mindset of thinking about this as only for students with an IEP or 504 plan or defined special need. Everybody needs differentiation. Think about your entire class, your whole group of people and peers that you work with. If I asked all of you to play a game of volleyball, we'll stick to volleyball, would you all be on the same skill level? Despite you being probably around the same age group, you're all adults, there's a good chance that there's a no. Some of you may have played in high school. Some of you may have played at a different college. Some of you may have never touched a volleyball. So in that case, even though you don't have IEPs, I still need to differentiate the way that I'm teaching you a bit based on your skill level, even as adults. Okay? So here you're going to talk about the way that you'll differentiate. And again, you don't know your students sometimes. So it's okay to be very general in this category. Once you get to know your students a bit better, you can be more specific. Okay, how will you interact with individual students and students with IEP and 504 plans? What I talk to students about frequently is your IEP is a legal document. Any instructions that are in the IEP, any recommendations, you have to follow. A great way to cover yourself in our lesson plan is to say that instruction can be modified as necessary to accommodate unique needs of students with IEPs and 504 plans. However, when you are teaching a college class, or peer teaching as we call it, you won't have any peers with IEPs and 504 plans. What I want you to take away from this is that the IEP is a legal document and you need to follow it. Okay, we got the tough part done. This is the part that frequently our students do the best with and have the most fun writing up. Your instructional part. So you have a pre-instruction, or we might call it like a warm-up. I'm sorry, warm-up is down here, but your pre-instruction will lead into the warm-up, okay? So this is where you're giving your students like an overview of what you're going to be doing for the day. You might take attendance, you might line your students up, you might get them ready for the warm-up, for the activity, answer any questions, etc. Okay? So what I want you to take away from this part, your instruction, your warm-up and stretches, is the level of detail. This isn't warm-up and stretches, neck stretches, wrist stretches, forearm. You need to describe how the students are going to do this. So the how is very important here. The criteria that I talk about all the time in my classes is, if you were the teacher and I haven't been in the classroom in several years, so if I were to come in and pick up this lesson, would I be able to follow it and go, oh, I know exactly what he or she wants their students to be doing. I know where they want them positioned in the gym or the activity area. I know what types of grouping they're using. I know what equipment they need, and so on. Okay? The way that you teach your lesson, meaning the activities that you choose, is up to you. So keep the warm-ups relevant to what you're teaching. You can use a general set of stretches. That's great too, but if you want to add something in to help with what you're teaching, that's also fantastic. So the lesson focus. If you look here, I'm trying not to lose all of this. If you look here, this person, when they planned their lesson, was highly detailed in exactly what the instructor will be doing, what they'll be saying. They also talk about something that we call common errors. So when you have a common error, it's something that you frequently see a student or person, let's say, mess up on. I'll use dribbling as an example here. When you're teaching someone to dribble, we all know that you need to use your finger pads when you're dribbling. We're not using our palm. When you're teaching younger kids, or even someone who's never played basketball before, something that you frequently see is slapping the ball with your palm. That would be an example of a common error with dribbling. So something that you frequently see. Throwing, overhand. You might see a common error of stepping without opposition. So same hand, same foot. You might see a lack of follow through. Those are things that commonly happen that students sort of mess up on before they're able to master the skill. Okay, you'll need to have drills and activities in each lesson. So what are you going to be teaching? You don't just jump right into a game. You need to have lead up activities to teach the students the actual skill. Okay, so this person did a fantastic job of outlining all the different drills that they're going to be using. You'll frequently see 4 drills in a lesson. If 2 covers what you need to teach, that's fine. I would rather you do 2 really awesome drills than 4 that you're rushing through. Okay, so again, you have some freedom here to design this how you need for your students. And we are finally at the end. We talk about evaluating your students. So you want to tie these back to your objectives up above. So however you said you would evaluate your students, whether it was 7 out of 9 on a rubric, 8 out of 10 attempts, and so forth, that also needs to be listed in your assessment. And then last but not least, you have an extension of your lesson. So what you would do here is, again, unique to everybody. Take a read through this, and you'll have this in your in each class. Take a read through this and really think about how you would extend your lesson beyond what you taught during this time. All right, everyone, it looks daunting, but I promise once you get into writing lesson plans, this will become easier for you. There is a lot in here that you can translate from one lesson to another within reason, making sure that it fits what you are teaching. But it will get easier, I promise. I think that the most fun part and what you're probably looking forward to planning most are those instructional tasks, those drills, the skills that are leading up. Couple of things as we close out here. Don't forget your central focus is the why. Your content standards. You have access to a link right here. Your objectives need to be measurable. I need that criteria. It's so important. Theoretical principles and research-based practice. This needs to be a part of your lesson. Language, very important. Think about your action verbs here. Remember that the IEPs and 504s must be adhered to no matter what. Your instruction needs to be detailed enough that if someone came into your room and picked up your lesson, they would know exactly what you need done with the students. Lesson focus is important. Make sure to talk about, again, the cues and the common errors. Those are so important. What are the steps to perform your skill, and what are some common errors that you see students use or errors that happen as they're trying to complete that skill? All right, I've talked a whole lot to you. This video is super important. Make sure that you watch it in its entirety. You'll have access to it through the entire semester and in other courses. You will also have access to the sample lesson that you see here. Thanks, everybody, and I look forward to seeing or meeting you all soon.